So good morning, everyone, and I'm so glad that you can join us today for our celebration of a piece of legislation which is only going to further the ability of our great mayor to make this the Green New Deal city for the United States and for the planet. We were able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 through the Senate last evening. Now it's on a pathway to the House and then to the President of the United States for his signature. I'm joined here today by our Green New Deal Mayor, Michelle Wu, by Clean Energy Champion Joe Curtatone, President of the Northeast Clean Energy Council, Massachusetts Environmental Warrior, Cobble Ames, and our partner in environmental justice, Roseanne Bongiovanni, Executive Director, Green Roots Chelsea, and our climate and environmental justice advocates know this hard-fought victory is decades in the making. 12 years ago, I watched my landmark legislation that I was able to get through the House of Representatives die in the Senate without a vote. In the intervening decade, we have suffered the consequences of climate action. Weather that used to be extreme is now the new normal, and that normal is deadly. But today, powered by a movement that never once wavered in the struggle for a livable future, we have a fighting chance at combating this crisis. This weekend, my Democratic colleagues and I joined together in passing a bill that makes historic investments in climate justice and delivers the resources we need to get started. And it was my honor to be partnering with Elizabeth Warren throughout this fight to make sure that Massachusetts, in our perspective, to be the cutting-edge state and showing that this can be done, guaranteed that we would get the vote and have it pass on the floor of the United States Senate. And it is my honor to partner with her in this fight. And critically, this legislation passes the baseline climate test of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, creating millions of new good-paying union clean energy jobs, and beginning the long overdue process of investing in justice for frontline communities. So this bill reduces greenhouse gases by 40%. It spends $60 billion on environmental justice issues targeting black, brown, immigrant, and indigenous communities who have long borne a disproportionate burden of the harm in our country. And according to UMass Amherst study just last week, it will create 9 million new jobs, clean energy jobs in our country. Reduction in greenhouse gases by 40%, $60 billion to environmental justice communities, and 9 million new jobs created, all in one bill. And on top of that, there is also a dramatic reduction in the cost of prescription drugs for seniors in our country, and funding for individuals who otherwise would have seen an average of $800 increase in their insurance premiums for health care in our country, all in the same bill. So this is an historic piece of legislation. It is the funding we need for the health of the planet and the funding we need for the health of families in our country to pay their health care bills. And so for me, this is an incredible moment. We are going to ultimately say to the American people, there's no reason why you have to pay $4 or $5 a gallon for gasoline when you can have an all-electric vehicle that averages 75 cents for your payment for your all-electric vehicle to be able to move you anywhere you want in our state or in our country. And we put in, for the first time, a $4,000 tax break for used electric vehicles so that we lower the income level ultimately for those who can afford it, because most people buy used cars in our country, not brand new cars. And by having a tax break for used EVs, we're going to see a penetration in the lower income groups in our country much more rapidly than we would have otherwise. We're also putting in tax breaks for energy-saving appliances in people's homes. We're going to incentivize weatherization across our country. And finally, it's going to make sure that we make things in America again. We create the incentives to ensure that there is domestic manufacture of electric vehicles, of solar panels, of wind turbines here in the United States of America. We have to break these supply chains from China and other parts of the world that are more dangerous in terms of a guarantee that they're going to be available to American workers and American consumers. And so for the first time, we are able to build that in. And one of my provisions is $10 billion, which I was able to secure for the domestic manufacture of offshore wind turbine technologies here in the United States so that they will not be imported. And another provision which I was able to add was a $30 billion climate bank. And that climate bank is going to be making available to individuals, to cities and towns across the country, the ability to be able to get super low interest loans in order to take on climate-related projects in their own communities. McKinsey, the consulting firm, says that it will unleash $7 to $10 of private sector investment for every single dollar that the federal government puts in. So that's 30 billion times 10. Okay, so upwards of $300 billion of additional investment because of the leveraging that it makes possible. And it can be for housing, public housing units. It can be for a smaller business that wants the funding they need. It can be for a community that wants to deploy an array of solar in their community to remediate otherwise unsolvable local environmental issues. So all of this combined makes it one of the most important pieces of legislation to ever be considered by the United States Congress. We have a lot more work to do to complete a Green New Deal. But this is an excellent start. We know that in this legislation there are concessions that have been made to Senator Manchin in terms of the leasing of public lands, and that's something I'm going to be monitoring very, very closely, because the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, is the constitution of the environment in our country. It has been on the books since 1970, and I have been protecting it for the duration of my career, and I'm going to be monitoring that very, very closely to make sure that there are no decisions which are made that undermine the protections which our country absolutely needs. So I know all too well, going back to 2009 and 2010, that nothing is a political option. And the political option of nothing was taken in 2009 and 2010. But no is not a planetary option. We have to take action. That's what this bill does. It says to the rest of the world that the United States is back, that we will be a leader, that we are not going to be sitting on the sidelines any longer. and that we have to reduce dramatically the greenhouse gases that go up into the atmosphere to avoid the worst consequences of the storms, of the floods that we see every single night leading the news here in Massachusetts and across our country. And we have to be the leader. So that is why, I'm so happy today and to be here with national leaders on this issue, and none more than our great mayor of the city of Boston, the great Michelle Wu. Please, Madam Mayor.
I am so excited today. I am so excited and grateful for your leadership over so many peaks and valleys of hope and lost hope to get us here. I am grateful that not only will the city of Boston be able to truly take up the charge to be the leading Green New Deal city in the country, but that cities all across our country now are empowered to become Green New Deal cities. And most of all, I am deeply emotional and relieved as a mother that we are finally seeing a bit of the scale of action that we need for our kids. I share all the time that my two boys are what start and end my day. My older son, Blaze, is 7, and when he was born in December of 2014, I was processing so much as a new mom and a new city councilor, and then the news came right around that time of year that it was the hottest year ever on record at that point, right? Hundreds and hundreds of years of record keeping. I did all the research, all these intense weather events that year, and it was scary thinking about the future ahead for my new little baby with records being broken. When he turned 1, same thing happened that December. Hottest year ever on record, hottest year ever on record. And his years on this planet have been our planet's hottest ever years. This month, in fact, last month, or actually we're on August now, June of 2022 is the hottest that we have seen, first time that we've reached 100 degrees in Boston in 70 years. And we're today still in a heat emergency as we see the many impacts of climate change continue to intensify. And so this couldn't have come at a better moment for us. We are so thankful and so grateful for your leadership. Today is an exciting day for many reasons also. Today is the official announcement as we welcome Boston's first ever Green New Deal director, Oliver Sellers Garcia. Thank you for joining us. Oliver officially starts in September 6th. So we were saying beforehand that now we have to top his first day with even bigger news than Senator. But we're so grateful and ready to go at the city level to make sure that we can take advantage of all of the benefits that you have delivered to translate down directly to our community members and our families. I want to recognize that this moment also is a victory that the Senator has championed on behalf of and alongside so many activists and community leaders who have been pushing us all along for decades. And some of them you will hear from soon. Others are represented in this room. This is decades in the making and would not have happened without the drumbeat and the hope, faith, and relentless advocacy from our community organizations and activists. So keep it up, and we're so excited. Thank you especially to our environmental justice organizations, young people who have been organizing all across the country to make sure that we move with urgency in this moment. This legislation centers our environmental justice communities by making crucial investments in EJ mapping, community air quality monitoring, addressing urban heat islands, as well as improvements to the walkability, safety, transit, accessibility of our streets and neighborhoods, and making climate benefits more affordable and accessible to all. In Boston, we've been proud to try to do our part, praying for this big news. We are requiring large building owners across the city to reduce their emissions. We've divested city funds from harmful industries, including fossil fuels, private prisons, and tobacco. And we're implementing a Green New Deal for Boston's public schools as well, upgrading our facilities, reducing municipal building emissions, and creating a healthier, more nurturing learning environment for all of our students. We know this work couldn't wait, and today we are so thrilled that we're not doing it alone. This is a type of investment at the scale that we need, and it's a historic day. Boston will seize all of the opportunities that this presents, from funding electrification of vehicles in fleets throughout our city and encouraging and helping to break down the barriers for all of our residents to tap into green energy, grabbing those tax credits for energy efficient buildings, and plugging our families, our hardworking residents into some of the we're going to get more than our fair share of those 9 million jobs in Boston and the greater Boston area. It sets us up to serve as a model for the rest of the world in being bold and imaginative with the actions that we can take to protect our planet. And so I'm so thrilled to be celebrating this remarkable victory for our communities and for our planet, and excited to demonstrate just how much we can accomplish when we do so together with urgency. Un poco en español también, para los residentes y familias. Gracias, Senator Markey. Este mes de junio, la temperatura media de Boston fue más de 6 grados superior a la normal, convirtiéndose en el junio más caluroso registrado, y la última vez que vimos temperaturas de 100 grados en junio fue hace 70 años. Es apropiado que hoy, después de haber prolongado nuestra emergencia de calor una vez más, estemos aquí para celebrar la aprobación de una legislación histórica sobre el clima. Legislación defendida por los líderes demócratas unidos a nivel federal, en particular por el Senator Markey, que lleva más de una década luchando por una acción federal contra el cambio climático. También quiero reconocer a los increíbles activistas de la justicia ambiental que se han mantenido firmes en la exigencia de un cambio para un planeta habitable. Los jóvenes que, tras décadas de organización en ciudades, estados y países de todo el mundo, han hecho posible esta victoria. El voto de ayer se ha forjado durante décadas y dará forma a nuestro mundo durante las próximas décadas. Esta legislación se centra en nuestras comunidades de justicia ambiental, haciendo inversiones cruciales en control de la calidad de aire de la comunidad, tratamiento de calor urbano, así como mejoras en transporte público, la seguridad y la accesibilidad de nuestras calles y comunidades. Mucho antes de que se aprobara esta ley, nosotros en Massachusetts y aquí en Boston nos hemos comprometido a demostrar lo mucho que es posible cuando nos unimos para dar prioridad a la salud de nuestro planeta. Hemos estado tomando acción. Estamos exigiendo a los propietarios de grandes edificios de toda la ciudad que reduzcan sus emisiones. Estamos desinvirtiendo los fondos de la ciudad de industrias perjudiciales como los combustibles fósiles, las prisiones y el tabaco. Estamos aplicando un Green New Deal para las escuelas públicas de Boston a través de la mejora de nuestros edificios escolares, la reducción de las emisiones de los edificios municipales y la creación de un entorno de aprendizaje más saludable y enriquecedor para nuestros alumnos. Sabemos que esta labor no puede esperar. Y también hoy estamos muy agradecidas por el liderazgo de nuestro director nuevo del Boston Green New Deal, Oliver Sellers García. Bienvenido y gracias otra vez. Hoy estoy agradecida a todos de saber que no lo hacemos solos y de ver el tipo de inversión a la escala que exige esta crisis. Gracias.
Beautiful. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And next, again, Joe Curtatone, somebody who transformed the city of Somerville and is now the president, thank goodness, of the Northeast Clean Energy Council. Welcome, Mr. Mayor.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Well, good morning. I can't tell you what an honor it is to stand here alongside such incredible leaders and champions, from Senator Markey to Mayor Wu, Roseanne Bongiovanni, and Carol Ames. But also personally, how proud I am and commend Boston for the hiring of Oliver Sellers Garcia. Has a Somerville flavor to him, and we worked together for several years. But let me just say this, because it is important that we're here in Boston, and leaders like Mayor Wu are leading the narrative, because at cities is where it's going to happen. There's a quote from the book Metropolitan Revolution, that as cities lead, nations follow. And in Oliver, I don't have to tell you this, Mayor Wu, you're someone who leads with values, who understands it takes a whole of society approach to meet our climate action goals, to lead with diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and to align all the components and expertise in the ecosystem to achieve our goals. But I come here today representing a clean energy and climate economy organization with more than 300 members in the Northeast Clean Energy Council. And I cannot heap enough praise on Senator Ed Markey for his years of relentless and sustained effort to deliver this historic bill. It touches, as has been mentioned, on everything from offshore wind to solar power, to energy storage, to modernizing the grid, to electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure, to clean buildings, to public transit, to all manner of decarbonization. I mean, the entire array of technologies that can help deliver this planet from a climate catastrophe are in this bill, Now, we all know the enormity of the task that is climate response. It is this century's moonshot. I mean, when in our societal existence has been such an important cause like climate action, but also inextricably tied to business development and economic opportunity. It's right there for the taking. And what I'm here to say today is that the Inflation Reduction Act, that is called, is the fuel that will propel what we need to get us there. Groups like the Northeast Clean Energy Council have spent years trying to educate policymakers and the public that we have the technology to pull our climate out of this nosedive. In fact, we've already developed technology that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 60% over the next decade if we can bring them to implementation. We can produce clean energy. We can move around and manufacture the goods we use in modern life in a sustainable way. Yet we have been fighting as a society, an established and deeply entrenched old guard that has done everything it can to delay this necessary transition to clean energy. This bill, led by Senator Markey and others, will shatter that resistance and lead to a transition more rapid than anyone could have imagined even 2 weeks ago. It ensures the most reliable and affordable energy projects we can build are clean energy projects. Now, if you want a resilient energy system that can endure heat waves like we've been having this summer, or cold snaps like we had last winter, then renewable energy is the only way forward. If you want energy independence, let's stop pretending oil and gas that we dredge from under the earth hundreds and thousands of miles away, and that's inherently tied to global markets and problematic regimes, is the answer. It's old, inefficient technology that cannot compete with the sun and wind that we have right here at our fingertips, right here in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is like Texas before the oil boom when it comes to these renewable sources. And we have an entire climate economy that's ready to kick into high gear. And we're talking about decades of good paying jobs and opportunity as we do the necessary conversion work and build out the local industries that are going to power our future and returning those benefits back to people, place, and planet locally. And they're doing it better and more affordably. You know what the global commodity price for sunlight is today, folks? $0. Do you know what the per barrel price is for wind? $0. Also, let's keep our fingers crossed and encourage that Governor Baker signs the landmark climate legislation here in Massachusetts this week. Then we're going to see a rapid clean energy transition that can bring opportunity and improved quality of life to every home, on every street, in every neighborhood here in the Commonwealth. Now, I know we're not used to hearing the good news when it comes to climate, but these two bills together will reshape the Commonwealth. It's always hard to gauge history while you're living in it, but this is the moment where we rolled up our sleeves and got to work on securing our future, where we jumped on a champion's back to get it done. This is where we cleared the way for something new and better to replace the technologies that are killing our planet. So once again, I want to thank, first, as Mayor Wu said, every advocate and activist, every person from all walk of life who's fought. If you don't think that has impact, I hope this sends a clear message that it does, and our work's not done. We're going to keep fighting. but Senator Markey and Senator Warren, along with our entire delegation in the House, which is going to be voting this bill, and especially President Biden and Vice President Harris, who will sign it into law. This is the consequential, game-changing climate legislation for which we have been clamoring for almost 2 decades. For those of us in the climate economy, this is the thing that will propel us, and we are ready to blast off, so buckle up. Thank you, Senator.
Well, appreciate it. And next, Roseanne Bongiovanni from Green Roots, Chelsea.
Thank you. Senator, you brought so much money back from Washington that you're literally dropping it out of your pockets.
Oh, my goodness.
We are so grateful. Good morning. Thank you, Senator Markey, for the invitation to join you today on this momentous occasion. And thank you for your leadership and lifetime commitment to climate and environmental justice that has helped to achieve this historic moment. My name is Roseanne Bongiovanni, and I'm the Executive Director of Green Roots. We are a resident-led organization working to achieve environmental and climate justice and improved public health in Chelsea, East Boston, and surrounding communities. I'm joined here today by some of my fellow colleagues. Thank you again for this invitation to be with you all. For those of us who live in environmental justice communities, this bill is a matter of life and death. Our residents have been disproportionately burdened by decades of environmental racism and oppression that have left our neighborhoods polluted, unhealthy, and dangerous to live in. The daughter of immigrant working class parents, I grew up in Chelsea, not knowing that we lived in a waterfront community. Yes, Chelsea is surrounded by waterways on 3 sides. We never felt like we lived on a peninsula, but rather played in the shadows of the fossil fuel industry in the extractive economy. Massive petroleum storage tanks, tanneries, road salt piles, junkyards, power plants, and more noxious uses dominated our waterfront and that of our adjacent cities and towns. Over the course of the last 3 decades, Green Roots has worked to fight back. When we fight, we win. To stop dirty diesel power plants and ethanol freight trains, to remove 2,000 tons of air pollutants annually through truck electrifications, to plant thousands of trees, construct parks, community gardens, and urban farms, and most importantly, to build a powerful, intergenerational, inclusive movement of low-income residents and residents of color working to reverse decades of environmental racism and oppression. Despite amazing accomplishments with our allied partners in environmental justice, like ACE, Neighbor to Neighbor, Chinatown Progressive Association, low-income communities and communities of color continue to face disproportionate burdens. Our communities were the hardest hit by COVID-19, the most impacted by these severe heat waves, most likely to be lead poisoned, suffer from asthma and chronic respiratory and cardiovascular disease, and most likely to continue to be subjected to the siting of polluting industries. We have been calling for bold action, investments in our communities, and prioritizing the lives of low-income people and people of color. We have raised the alarms to the concerns of climate threats and environmental injustice. We're so grateful to you, Senator Markey, and your fellow Democratic leaders who have responded to the call for bold action, investment, and prioritizing the lives of low-income people and people of color. This bill will assist environmental justice communities in fighting the hazards of heat island and flood impacts, more equitably access energy efficiency measures, bring solar energy and wind to our communities, fight dependence on fossil fuels, and bring much-needed jobs in the climate sector to our communities. While this won't end the environmental and climate threats facing our communities, and it won't unilaterally end the harms of the extractive economy, particularly from the fossil fuel industry, it is a historic moment of investment and prioritization of environmental justice communities for major climate advances. It is the bold action and investment we need to positively impact the life or death scenarios facing our brown, Black, immigrant, Indigenous, and low-income communities. Thank you, Senator and Mayor Wu. Thank you for your lifetime commitment to climate change and environmental justice. I'm honored to stand here with you today.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. And next, we're going to hear from Cobble Ames from 350 Mass.
Woo! I would be remiss if I didn't say that I've had a sleepless night, and not the kind that I usually have, but one of just pure excitement and joy for what the senator has delivered to us today. And I must thank you wholeheartedly for your leadership, but also for your commitment and courage to this fight, because it takes political courage to get where we are today. As the senator said, my name is Cabell Eames. I'm the political director for 350 Massachusetts. We work in collaboration with many groups across Massachusetts, and we even work nationally, too. Until today, as a veteran climate activist, the movement and myself, okay, we've been frustrated, we've been broken by the lack of action in addressing the climate crisis. And in fact, I remember a time when we were mocked, belittled, and blatantly ignored. But that's not the case today. We are here to celebrate the Inflation Reduction Act. We are here because we have mobilized middle schoolers, high schoolers, Gen X, millennials, baby boomers, and we celebrate. We celebrate with senators like Senator Markey, and we celebrate with Michelle Wu. It is because of our mobilization efforts that we are here today, that we have empowered this movement that has been under duress for some time. Today we celebrate. This is a remarkable piece of legislation, and while it is not perfect, it will serve as a catalyst for more investments in green technologies and adaptation measures that will directly impact people's lives for the better. It incentivizes decarbonization through tax credits for non-emitting technologies, and it will catapult us into electrification at scale, which is exactly what this moment requires. This bill is also long overdue. This bill is also a long overdue victory, I should add, for the underserved communities, and it will provide billions of dollars in grants for affordable transportation access, air quality monitoring, heat island mitigation, and equal access to energy efficiency technology. These are the types of policies we have been fighting for, and this triumph will reinvigorate the climate movement in the midterms and beyond. And nothing makes me prouder to say that this movement sent Senator Markey back to Washington 2 years ago to disrupt the power of the fossil fuel lobby and deliver on climate change solutions, and he has prevailed. We will continue to be a relentless partner in the fight against climate change. And we look forward to many more successes with climate leaders like Senator Markey, like Mayor Wu, and all of the rest of you that are out there. We will be a partner. We will get you elected, and we will fight for the change this moment deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Cabell. Thank you, Cabell, so much. And so this is a big day. It's a big day. When I was a boy, the Malden River was 3 blocks from my house, and it still is. And my mother would say, Eddie, whatever you do, don't swim in the Malden River. Because the Malden River was black with a pre-Jimi Hendrix purple haze over it. From all of the factories, all of the chemical companies, all of the rubber companies using the Malden River as a dumping ground. And I lived, and still do, 3 blocks from that river, as did all of the people in a blue-collar community, because that's where these facilities are. The suburbs breathe different air than blue-collar communities breathe, than poor communities breathe. That's what this bill is all about. It is about environmental justice. It is ensuring that we once and for all, and finally, do something about this unfair and disproportionate burden that blue-collar and poor communities have been suffering from. Not just here, but around the world. And we know that. to be the case. In the 1990s, I was able to pass 3 bills. A bill to create the 18-inch satellite dish, a bill to move 200 megahertz over so that young entrepreneurs could maybe figure out a way of having us all disconnect our black rotary dial phones, and maybe we could have some device that was in our pocket that would have more power than the computers that put a man on the moon in 1969. And then the 1996 Telecommunications Act. And I'm very proud of that bill because on that day, President Clinton signed that bill. Not one home in America had broadband. Not one home in America had broadband. And it unleashed a revolution that moved our whole country from analog to digital, from narrowband to broadband. And there's no looking back. Young people embraced it. This bill is going to move us from a dirty economy to a clean economy. It's going to be the same kind of revolution that creates the same number of millions of jobs that young people are going to be able to move into, that union workers will be able to embrace and provide for their families. It won't just be a job, it'll be a career for generations to come in transforming our economy. So back in early 2019, I came to a realization. Yes, I was able to pass the Waxman-Markey bill in 2009 in the House, but it died in the Senate. And that was an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases by the year 2050. And it would have unleashed this same revolution, but it died in the Senate because of the fossil fuel industry. Yale University and others did an analysis saying that the death of that bill was as a result of the largest single amount of money ever spent to defeat any bill in the history of the United States. Why is that? Because it's the wealthiest industry that was going to be disrupted by that legislation. And so I realized that there was a problem, and it had to be solved. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I, we had lunch in the Senate dining room in the first week of December of 2018. And the two of us decided that we would create a Green New Deal. And our staffs would work over the ensuing 8 weeks to craft a Green New Deal. And why did we do that? Because we knew that we would need a movement to create the momentum to create a moment. And this is the moment. The moment is a response to all of that action at the grassroots in our country that did not exist in 2009 and 2010. On that day, I wore this tie as we introduced the Green New Deal. And I wore it yesterday on the floor of the United States Senate. It's a little bit more tattered now because it's gone to so many events over the last 3 years. But ultimately, it is the Green New Deal momentum that created the political pressure that said to the Congress, you must act. You must respond generationally to our cry that you no longer abandon your job to protect future generations in our country. So that's the day that we're celebrating right now. And it's been a long time coming, but what it's going to do is it's going to unleash a generational revolution that will employ people in clean energy industries to the point where the rest of the world, in the same way that they now have these devices in their pockets, they'll have access to very inexpensive wind and solar and all-electric vehicles and storage battery technologies and transmission systems invented in the United States by American entrepreneurs and workers. That's what we did in the 90s. We're going to do the same thing for clean energy in this century as well. So let me stop. Let me stop and ask if you have any questions.
Senator,
Yes.
Republicans have criticized this. They say this will raise taxes on working families, and also say in no way does this reduce inflation. Does it reduce inflation, and if so, how?
Well, for seniors, there's going to be a cap on what they pay out of pocket for pharmaceutical drugs. That's dramatic for seniors. They won't have to make unconscionable decisions because of this legislation. A dramatic lowering of pharmaceutical costs. For upwards of 10 to 15 million Americans, we're going to save them $800 a year in their insurance premiums. And those are the people who can least afford it, because that's what the Affordable Care Act actually takes care of, those who can least afford health care insurance in our country. We're also going to be providing the incentives, again, for weatherization, for helping the poorest communities and the poorest families to be able to deal with their energy bills by helping them to install the energy technologies that are going to dramatically reduce their bills. And in the long term, as Joe said, solar and wind are a lot cheaper than oil and gas. And again, the oil and gas industry doesn't want you to think about the cost to every taxpayer of paying for all of the aircraft carriers to protect those cordons of ships bringing in oil into our country. They don't want you to think about that. They don't want you to think about the cost of all the young men and women we have to send overseas in order to protect the oil that we import into our country. And the oil and gas industry doesn't want you to think about all of the asthmas, all of the premature deaths, all of the other disease that we have in our society because of the toxic nature of this curse that we have lived with for too long. Of the oil and gas industry has been able to protect us. So yes, we are going to be fighting inflation, and at the core of it is, of course, a $300 billion reduction in our deficit. And from Larry Summers on, Nobel Prize winners are all saying that this is going to reduce inflation. It's by definition deflationary because we're taking money in totality out of the economy. And that has a deflationary effect on the economy. And Larry Summers, all the way down the line, they all agree that that is the case. And that's where ordinary families right now are suffering. And we're going to do something in this bill that is unprecedented in my career. We're actually reducing the deficit. And we're doing so with no Republican votes, which is why we can call it the Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, that is what it is doing, and I think the American people get it.
While you envision a wonderful future, during the transition, won't taxes on the natural gas taxes said to increase average family gas bills 17%, crude oil taxes 16.4 cents a barrel, and doubling the coal on electricity? Doesn't that mean the folks that right now can't afford a car, even at $4,000 off, aren't there basically their electricity, their gasoline, and their gas bills all going to go up?
No, the beauty of this bill is that we're finally going to tax the ExxonMobil and Chevron. Believe it or not, last year, Chevron paid 2% on all of their profits. Kindergarten teachers in Massachusetts paid 18 to 20% on what they earned, and the average kindergarten teacher makes $38,000 a year. Exxon 2%. ExxonMobil paid 3% on their revenues last year, and they are going to, and Chevron paid 2%. Well, finally, we're going to lift them up to 15%. That's what they're going to have to pay, and that will pay for. That would be a big part of paying then for all of these programs that are in this bill. Finally, they're going to pay their fair share, a little close to their fair share of the dues that they should be paying in order to keep our society going. And on the issue of what turns out to be like 0.3 cents per gallon, you mentioned the 16 cents. There's there's 42 gallons of gasoline per barrel, so that comes down to 3 cents per gallon. But that money is going to be used then for a fund to clean up the toxic waste that these industries leave over. Okay? We need the funding in order to accomplish that goal. But of course, the industry doesn't want to pay for 3 cents, 3/10 of 1 cent, in order to clean up the messes that they leave behind, like the Malden River. And they also don't want to be funding their fair share of the wind and solar and all-electric vehicle revolution that we have in our country. So it's just another example of crocodile tears from the oil and gas industry. And even that message is kind of deceptive because it's 3/10 of 1 cent that we're talking about.
What about natural gas? That seems to be, because they say at least 17% average gas bill will be bigger.
The crocodile tears of the natural gas industry doesn't actually extend to all of the export terminals for natural gas in our country that they want to construct to send natural gas from the United States overseas. And all experts say that leads to a 20 to 25% increase in the natural gas price for domestic use in our country because there's less natural gas in our own country. They don't seem to care, when it comes to consumers, except to the extent to which it leads to them being able to tip them upside down and shaking more dollars out of their pockets. So it's just more hypocrisy from the natural gas industry. They're absolutely incorrigible, and that's why their day of reckoning is arriving. Okay, that's why young people all across our country are so happy that there has been an intergenerational movement that has risen up in order to finally take on all of these lies on climate change, on cost to consumers, to the health of our country that they have been perpetrating deliberately for generations. Questions?
I have a question about the FTA. Do you think the FTA should take over the MBTA?
Well, I'll let the mayor speak to this as well, but my view is that the federal government has to work in close partnership with the MBTA in order to get the T back online again. This has been a problem which has festered for a long, long time. When I was a boy, I was dependent upon the Orange Line to get me over to Boston College. It was an hour and 45 minutes from Malden to get to BC and then to come back from BC. So I can only imagine what a student today is feeling, knowing that they don't have an Orange Line. They don't have, the public transportation which is available to them. My father used to have to take, public transportation to go from Malden into Charlestown to the Hood Mill Company so he could get his truck. We didn't have a car when I was a boy. We were totally dependent upon the public transportation system until we got our Pontiac. But before that, my father needed the MTA, it was called at the time, to get to work in Charlestown. And if you don't have that, it's a pain, okay? And it's an incredible disruption of your family. So for workers, for students, it's got to get fixed. And we need the closest working partnership with the FTA, which has identified the problems in eye-watering detail, to work with the MBTA to get it fixed and get it fixed as quickly as possible.
So it sounds
Madam
like-
Mayor?
Just to follow up, it
Yeah.
sounds like you don't want a complete takeover. You don't support that. You want more of a partnership.
Yeah, I think we need there to be constructed a very close working relationship with the FTA, ensuring that all of their recommendations are implemented rapidly for the benefit of our working people in Boston and in Greater Boston. Okay, right now this is absolutely unacceptable. I live in Malden. We have an orange line that stops at Oak Grove and it stops in Malden Square. And these are working people. It's a blue-collar community. Malden High School last year was 27% white, 25% black, 24% Latino, 23% Asian. Okay, so these are working people, immigrant families, working hard, but they need the T. Okay, and we cannot have this system shut down again. We have to do it right, do it now, so that we don't have to return. And that has not been the case for a long, long time. Madam Mayor, I think you should.
I completely agree with the senator. We need a partnership, not a takeover. And the situation is at a breaking point when riders don't know on any given day what might come up, how serious of a safety concern might emerge that day, how late they will be that day. And so it is time for sustained focus, investment, and action to tackle what we've known for many, many years has been a building problem. With any service, the most important, I believe, is for those who experience it every day to have a direct voice in shaping it. And so the further away you get in terms of federal oversight of a local service, complete takeover, I think, raises some concerns about what that impact would be. In fact, we should be going the other direction, and the city of Boston and many of our municipalities in the metro area have been fighting for direct seats on the MBTA governing board for Boston and another municipality. We came just about as close as we could come in this last budget cycle, and so it was passed by the House and Senate, slightly amended by the governor, those amendments accepted by the House, and then went to the Senate, where in the rush of many, many priorities, there was no action. And so we are still hopeful that it is just pending this final sign-off from the state Senate for the city of Boston and another municipality to have that direct voice in governance that would give voice to the many, many riders who rely on this service every single day and who have no other options. So we have to get this right, and we hope that whether it's in informal session to address other issues and legislation that the state legislature may take up, that they will continue to take this up as well.
Mayor, while we have you,
Okay, if I may, I would like Joe, and then we'll come right back over. I'm sorry, yeah, absolutely no problem. Last year, in the fall, we were able, in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, to include $9 billion for Massachusetts for transportation issues. So, a vision without funding is an hallucination. But $9 billion is a lot of money to come into the state of Massachusetts in order to work on this issue. And by the way, there's also going to be a referendum on the ballot this November on millionaires' tax. And if that passes, ultimately, billions of dollars will be there for education and for transportation in the state of Massachusetts. And I urge people to vote for that referendum, because we need to.
Emergency, could you just tell us
Okay,
about
please.
extending it?
Yeah, please.
Climate, thanks.
Okay, no, Joe, you want to say, yeah.
If I could just add more on the transportation piece, having spent every day of 18 years fighting alongside Senator Markey to make sure the Green Line extension happened, to get the Orange Line station open in Assembly, which was the first one in 27 years at that time, and with other leaders like Mayor Wu to talk about making transportation equitable, easy to choose, sustainable, affordable. We need to get this right from the climate perspective. And just a couple of points. This is more than just service around Boston, Somerville, Cambridge. The Orange Line is the only line that connects to every other line and serves the most underserved, most vulnerable communities and our most skilled workers. The metropolitan Boston region is more than 101 cities and towns and contributes more than 80% of the economic activity to the whole Commonwealth. We got to get this right. And on the climate side, I support, with my colleagues, some bold, deliberate intervention, but to be determined what that looks like, with some mandates for the Commonwealth. We've got to get the transit up to a good state of repair. We've got to continue investment. I thank Senator Markey and others who fought to make sure projects like the Green Line happen, continue to happen, South Coast Rail, but also to develop our climate action goals. Because if we don't solve that, we cannot meet our climate action goals for the entire Commonwealth. So appreciate the question.
Yes,
And
good.
the heat emergency?
Excuse me?
Chime in first on heat emergency.
The emergency.
Heat emergency was a question,
Yes,
right?
please.
Okay.
No, you.
Sure,
Sure,
okay.
yeah. No, he asked.
And I think it would be important to hear from our advocates too, because the impact of high heat in Boston and Massachusetts is another life or death situation that climate presents now in a ever more urgent way. When the city of Boston, I know there are key experts in the room like Allison Brizius, our environment commissioner, when Boston solidified one of our earlier Climate Ready Boston reports, one of the findings was that in addition to rising sea levels and more intense precipitation, storms, and rain, a huge threat to our community members is increasing heat. That from the sort of 2017 or 2018, when that report was first written, projected forward several decades, the number of high heat days, defined as 90 degrees or higher in Boston, would triple. And that going from about a month's worth of 90-degree days across an entire year to an entire summer's worth of high heat days completely changes how we think about how industries that involve working outdoors function, how we think about the safety of residents and homes in aging infrastructure and many residential buildings that are older and don't have air conditioning built in. We saw, in particularly our environmental justice communities, the toll that that continues to take. And much of our city infrastructure also is relying on standards that were set many decades ago that we need to update and maintain. City pools, for example, it is incredibly frustrating to me that we are at a point where many of our city's pools, a necessary, at this point, climate mitigation feature, are down because several of them are decades past their useful life of when they should have been maintained and updated and completely redone. And so we are partnering with our federal and state partners to figure out how we can update all of our infrastructure. That's electrification. It's also heat mitigation and drainage and stormwater retention as well.
But in the short term, it's heat emergency. Extending it a day is whatever the city can do, huh?
Yes, and so the formal declaration of a heat emergency allows us to make sure that our resources are targeted in that way. The cooling centers will be open for all of our residents. They will be deploying water trucks throughout our neighborhoods. It is a small measure, and we have a lot more to do in terms of infrastructure. But again, the funding that this will provide will go a long way.
Mayor,
Any
what
idea
has
how
Boston-
much the heat emergency has cost at this point between the cooling centers and water trucks and things along those lines?
We don't have an estimate off the top of our head, but I think as we think about the Oliver's new role and climate, what we know for sure is that putting in the money now, whether it's for public transportation or infrastructure or electrification, always costs less to do it now than to kick the can down the road. And it is a burden on residents to see the continued acceleration of climate change. So we can try to follow
Can I
up.
ask you a question real quick? How are the meetings going with the state, with the green line going to be going down as well as the orange line? Any more concrete plans?
We are now talking specific bus mitigation measures, and so whether it's the shuttle buses that will be running and deciding those exact routes so that we can have shuttling from in kind of the northern half of the orange line, the green line, and then the southern half of the orange line, as well as how to support bus priority on other routes that are already existing, for example, like the 39 bus that aren't technically a shuttle bus, but we expect to see a lot more people using that as an alternative as well.
You're going to have a crush of students as well, all along the green and the orange line. How is this? This is a really big question. How is this not going to be chaos?
It will be chaos. There's no other way to. This is not an ideal situation by any means, and we never should have gotten to this point. But it is because of decades of delayed action, deferred maintenance, starving our public transit system of the resources that it needed, attaching the big dig debt to a public transit agency that made the MBTA carry more debt than any other public transit agency anywhere in the country. And so the infrastructure improvements that needed to be made along the way, the focus and the priority, we are fighting to make sure that this moment is one where we start to make right finally, and that the unprecedented, painful 4-week shutdown of the orange line and for a partial shutdown of the green line as well will actually result in the improvements and the changes so that we can count on this service when we come back online.
Mayor, just briefly on the T, can you talk about this weekend what EMS has had to deal with in terms of heat-related issues?
On the T, I don't know the details on
I'm
this one.
sorry, not on the T, on heat.
Oh, okay. It's like, oh no, there's one other. Yeah.
I just wanted to know, what's it been like out there? What's Boston EMS seen?
Yeah, let us follow up to make sure that we can get the exact statistics if there were heat exhaustion cases and what had happened. We've been watching it very carefully, and again, the heat emergency declaration makes it so that we are specifically preparing and being proactive about those resources, activating communications with residents, and deploying cooling, misting, heat resilience measures all throughout our neighborhoods. We did host our second of 3 large-scale open streets events. It was on Blue Hill Ave between Grove Hall and Nubian Square, and that was during one of the days of the heat emergency. So we had said this would be rain or shine or 100 degrees very hot. We had water stations along the route, lots of small businesses and residents pitching in, and that went very, very smoothly. We saw a great turnout, performances, artists, people enjoying that public space, and that is another mitigation measure too. If we can create activities for people to come out of their homes where they might not have air conditioning, they might be at higher risk, and be in the shade, be in a park, be near one of our cooling centers, that is something that we're actively trying to increase access to.
Do you agree with Senator Markey's call to make the TV free during the shutdown?
What do you think?
No.
No, the senator and Congresswoman Presley have been such champions for removing every possible barrier to public transit. We know that just like Massachusetts and Boston's legacy on investing in the public goods that we take for granted today, public education, public parks and open space, public libraries, public transportation is another one of those cornerstones that underlie everything. And the more people ride, the more everyone benefits. Even if you're not directly on that train or bus, you're breathing cleaner air. You're experiencing a faster commute yourself. And so any mechanism that we can have to ensure that we're removing barriers goes a long way. The legislation that, another bit of legislation, maybe that could be for Oliver's first day. How about the senator and the congresswoman have filed the Freedom to Move Act, which would generate billions of dollars for public transit agencies to be incentivized for fare free access. That would be transformational. And what we do know in this shutdown is that the shuttle buses will be entirely free, so residents will not be penalized for using those. Commuter rail will essentially be free as well, because you would just need to show an MBTA Charlie card, but not be charged a commuter rail fee for getting on any station in the Boston area, any Zone 1A, Zone 1, or Zone 2 commuter rail station. So for example, from Forest Hills to Back Bay, or from Forest Hills to Ruggles or South Station, there will be twice as many trains stopping at Forest Hills, commuter rail trains stopping at Forest Hills to take commuters there as well, downtown as well. So we hope that that will be a key link to help mitigate some of the Orange Line shutdown.
Okay, and again, to put an exclamation point on your question, in June of 2020, Congresswoman Presley and I had a press conference on our legislation in Mattapan, and then Councilor Wu came to our press conference to speak about the need for free fares, especially in poorer communities and for those who needed it the most. So this is almost, sometimes you can be right but too soon, but what's very apparent now because of the Orange Line and the Green Line is that we need to do something about this system. When I was a boy, the T worked. How can it be all these years later where it doesn't work? We're in the 21st century. We just have to spend the money, use all of our technological, capabilities in order to get this fixed once and for all. Any other questions that anyone may have? Thank you all for coming here on this great day. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Congratulations. Wow, wow, wow.